Matt, please go ahead.
Okay. So I want to begin first of all by saying Boker Tov, Tzoraim Tovim, and Erev Tov. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where it is that you find yourself. I know we have specific time, Central Time, Eastern Time, and of course Israel time. And it is such a privilege to join together in this virtual Beit Midrash. I want to thank Josh Schumann for all of the magic that you do behind the scenes, sitting in front of Mount Fuji. It is great to have you with us, Josh, and so appreciate all of the organization that goes into this zooming into Hanukkah. I am Rabbi Matt Berkowitz. I am proud to serve as Vice President of the Schechter Institutes. And as we jump into this very, very rich session in which we focus on Hanukkah, I want to say that the Nes Hanukkah, the miracle of Hanukkah that we are all praying for in this moment is, of course, the return of 100 hostages to Israel. We all know that those negotiations are in high gear now, and we are all hoping with great optimism that they will yield fruits. And please, God, let this Hanukkah be a Hanukkah in which we recall not only the past miracle, but also that we may celebrate a modern miracle in our day. So, as I said, we are in for a real treat over the next hour and a half or so. And just to give you a sense of the arc of learning that we're going to be doing, we will jump in with Rabbi Professor David Galinkin, president of Schechter Institutes, who will teach one cruise of oil. What exactly are we celebrating on Hanukkah? At 7:30, we will turn to Rabbi Irena Grisevskaya, From Bush to Gorbachev, How and Why Was Hanukkah Observed by World Leaders? And at 8 o'clock, we will close with a session taught by yours truly on the origin of the menorah, text, art, and history all woven together. Without further ado, I hand it off to Rabbi Professor David Galinkin. So excited to learn from you as always.
Thank you. It's nice to see many familiar faces on screen, or at least familiar names. If you share faces, we'll see them too. Um, First of all, I'd like to dedicate this year to the memory of my grandfather, Rabbi Mordechai Yaakov Golinkin, whose 50th yahrzeit was this past Friday on the 19th of Kislev. And if you want to learn more about him, you'll have to watch Shavua Tov at Schechter, which Josh will send out tomorrow. And that Dvar Torah is a connection between his life and the heroes of Hanukkah. Secondly, I apologize. I have to leave after my shiur. I have another commitment, but I know you're in for a treat with the other two classes. And lastly, I want to give you a warning or a promo that the WZO elections are coming up beginning March 10th. You'll be receiving emails from us and from other organizations, and we hope that you will vote in the WZO elections because thanks to the WZO, the Schechter Institutes receive quite a bit of funding from national institutions in the state of Israel. My teacher, Rabbi Aaron Rakefet, used to say that his teacher, Rabbi Soloveitchik, said, if you want to learn a topic you know absolutely nothing about, teach it. Well, that's what I'm doing this evening. My topic is one cruise of oil. What exactly are we celebrating on Hanukkah? And I wish I could tell you after spending the entire day studying the subject that I knew the answer. I do not. There is not one answer to that question. There are a number of classic ancient texts on the subject of what it is we are celebrating and why we are celebrating for 8 days. We're going to study some of those texts. I didn't put all of them in the source sheet. And then at the end, of course, I will summarize. For those of you who read English, I recommend this little book by Theodore Gaster, Professor Theodore Gaster, who was a genius who taught at various universities. It's called the Purim Hanukkah Custom and Tradition. I also recommend his book, The Festivals of the Jewish Year. These are books that came out in the 1950s and were then reprinted. And in Hebrew, I highly recommend this book by my friend, Professor Yosef Taboria Bar-Ilan University, which is called Moadei Yisrael B'Tkufat HaMishnah VaTalmud, the festivals of the Jewish people in the Talmudic, in the Mishnaic and Talmudic periods. In other words, he's trying to describe not the way we celebrate these festivals today, but how were they celebrated in the time of the Mishnah and Talmud. There are a lot of crazy theories about the origins of Hanukkah. For example, a book was published in 1930 by A.S. Rankin, The Origins of the Festival of Hanukkah, the Jewish New Age Festival. I don't know what New Age meant back in 1930. Today it means something different. And Rankin claimed that the Hanukkah was an adaptation of a pagan solstice festival. Since the solstice, the winter solstice falls in December, and they would light fires in the winter solstice because it was so dark, and they were afraid that the days were getting shorter and shorter. And we adopted that tradition, and that's what Hanukkah came from. As Professor Gaster points out in his book, that's rather far-fetched because, as you know, Hanukkah can occur at any time between the end of November and perhaps even early January. So to say that it's tied to a specific date in December is just silly because the winter solstice follows the sun and our festivals follow the moon. So therefore, that's one of the many theories that have been entertained about the origins of Hanukkah. I would rather look at the Jewish sources on the subject and see what we can learn from them. And I'm going to attempt to share this. And if not, I'm sure Josh will help me.
David, Rabbi, it's on the
Okay.
screen.
Okay, it's on the screen. Good. Okay. So there are 6 or 7 primary sources on the origins of Hanukkah, and we're going to quickly go through them. We don't have time to read them all. And I will give you the highlights. For each source, I'm going to ask, what is the name of the holiday in that ancient source? Does it mention 8 days or not? And why are we celebrating? What is the purpose of celebrating this holiday according to that ancient source? So we begin with the first book of Maccabees, which is the most important source about the Maccabean revolt against the Greek Syrians. It was originally, according to almost all scholars, it was originally written in Hebrew in the land of Israel in the 2nd century BCE. We do not have the Hebrew original. We only have Greek and other translations. And in modern times, it's been retranslated into Hebrew, English, and many other languages. I read the book of Maccabees, the first book of Maccabees, every year on Hanukkah because it is the most authentic source that we have. But that's the subject of another lecture I've given about why we should read the book of Maccabees on Hanukkah. So if you look at the source in front of you, I'm just going to move this.
Page 1, David.
Yeah. I'm just seeing if I can move it down. So this is the description of how it wasn't the end, the final victory. It was in the middle of the war with the Syrians. That Judah and his brothers and his fellows, it says in verse 43, they purified the temple, removing to an unclean place the stones which defiled it. They decided that they had to take apart the altar which had been built by the Greeks. Verse 46, they therefore pulled down the altar and stored away the stones in a fitting place on the temple hill, in other words, on the temple mount, until a prophet should arise who could be consulted about them. Interestingly, that fact is confirmed by the Mishnah in the Tractate of Midot. It also mentions these stones were still being stored on Har HaBayit at the end of the second temple period. And then they built a new altar in verse 48. And it goes on to say, they rebuilt the temple, they renewed the sacred vessels, the lampstand, incense, they burnt incense, etc., etc. Verse 52, then early on the 25th day of the 9th month, the month Kislev, in the year 148, this I believe is 165 BCE, the persecution of the Greeks began in 168 BCE. It says here that the sacrifice was offered on the new altar. And it says in verse 54, on the anniversary of the day when the Gentiles had profaned it, it was on the very same date, 25th of Kislev, when Antiochus Epiphanes had decreed that henceforth the Temple Mount, the temple, would be a pagan place of worship, that is when they purified the temple and rededicated it with hymns of thanksgiving, harps, lutes, cymbals. They all bowed down, worshiping and praising heaven. And now the key verse is verse 56. They celebrated the rededication of the altar for 8 days. There was great rejoicing as they brought burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings and thank offerings. There was great merrymaking. And then in verse 59, Judah and his brothers decreed that the rededication of the altar should be observed with joy and gladness at the same season each year for 8 days, beginning on the 25th of Kislev. So, what is this holiday called? If you look in, for example, in one of the Hebrew translations of Maccabim, first book of Maccabees, it's called Hanukkah HaMizbeach. It's not called Hanukkah. It's called the rededication or the dedication of the altar. They are not celebrating, at least according to the simple meaning, the kindling of lights. There's nothing here about a miracle, a cruse of oil that lasted for 8 days. They are celebrating the rededication of the altar. It lasts for 8 days. And they are celebrating the restoration of the altar and the menorah and the shulchan, the table, and the korbanot and the sacrifices. So this very early source, the earliest source we have about the Maccabean story, does not mention the Festival of Lights at all. It doesn't really stress the lighting of candles or anything like that. It talks about the Hanukkah of the Mizbeach, of the altar. The second ancient source is Second Maccabees. Now, Second Maccabees is a different kettle of fish, as they say. Second Maccabees was not originally written in Hebrew. It was originally written in Greek. And it's not considered as good a source about the Maccabean revolt because it was written in Greek in Egypt, apparently in Alexandria. In other words, it would be the difference between somebody who lived through the Six-Day War writing about it here in Israel, as opposed to a person living in New York City who did not participate in this battle and may not have even visited the land of Israel. So this is not considered as reliable a source as the first book of Maccabees. And its explanation of what Hanukkah is quite different than the explanation in first Maccabees. It says, and this is in chapter 10, it says that Judah Maccabeus with his men recovered the temple. He demolished the altars. Verse 3, he constructed another altar. And you'll notice here that the gap between the beginning of the revolt and this occasion is 2 years and not 3 years. Most historians accept the date of 3 years, which is also mentioned by Josephus. And then they pray to God, they pray to the Lord. Verse 5, they purify the sanctuary on the 25th day of Kislev. Verse 6, the joyful celebration lasted for 8 days. And here all of a sudden we segue into something rather surprising. It was like the Feast of Tabernacles. In other words, Second Maccabees says that Hanukkah was like the holiday of Sukkot, for they recalled how only a short time before they had kept that feast while they were living like wild animals in the mountains and caves. So they carried garlanded wands and branches with their fruits as well as palm fronds, and they chanted hymns to the one who had so triumphantly achieved the purification. In other words, they seem to be describing that Hanukkah is a mini Sukkot or Bimkom Sukkot in place of Sukkot that year. They are carrying around apparently the Arba'a Minim, the 4 species, and they are chanting Hallel. And Second Maccabees not only is consistent about this, but in 2 other verses, which I did not Xerox for you, which is chapter 1, verse 9 and chapter 1, verse 18, Second Maccabees actually calls Hanukkah Chag HaSukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. In one verse, the Feast of Tabernacles, in the other, the Feast of Tabernacles and Fire. In other words, the Second Maccabees so identifies Hanukkah with Sukkot that in 2 places it even calls Hanukkah Sukkot. It does not call the festival Hanukkah. In this passage, it calls it Chag Torat HaMikdash, the festival of the purification of the temple. And as we said in 2 other places, it calls it Tabernacles. It mentions the 8 days, but the thing being celebrated is more or less the same thing as in First Maccabees, which is the Mizbeach, the new altar, and the korbanot, the sacrifices. We now segue to Josephus, and Josephus is the first one to identify Hanukkah with lights. And Josephus is our most important source for Second Temple history. You may know the story. He was a Jewish general in the Galilee. He went over to the dark side, to the other side. He joined the Romans when they were fighting against the Jews during the Great Revolt. And that's why he lived. And he went to Rome, and there he wrote his major works, the Jewish Wars and Jewish Antiquities. Jewish Antiquities, Kadmoniot HaYehudim, is a retelling of the Hebrew Bible, but going all the way down to his time. And it's very long. We certainly don't have time to read it. But his explanation of Hanukkah is quite different than what we saw in the first and second books of Maccabees. If you look towards the bottom of the column, let me scroll down a little bit more. The paragraph numbers got lost here in the Xerox. If you'll see about 12 lines from the bottom of the page, well, it says, so much pleasure did they find in the renewal of their customs, that they made a law that their descendants should celebrate the restoration of the temple service for 8 days. And from that time to the present, we observe this festival, which we call the Festival of Lights. Giving this name to it, I think, from the fact that the right to worship appeared to us at a time when we hardly dared hope for it. In other words, he's explaining light in the metaphorical sense. It's called the Festival of Lights because God gave us light, so to speak, and we were once again able to worship our religion in freedom. So he is the first one to associate Hanukkah with lights. He talks about the 8 days, and in his terminology, it's not Hanukkah. It's not Hanukkah Mizbeach, as in First Maccabees, the dedication of the altar. It's not Chag Torat HaMikdash, the purification of the temple. It is, in modern Hebrew, we would say it's Chag HaUrim, which is one of the terms in Israel for Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights. Though his explanation for that is not really convincing, he says that the light symbolizes religious freedom. Now we're going to segue to two sources that I did not Xerox for you. I do not know that there is an English translation of this work. This huge book is called Megillat Ta'anit, the Scroll of the Fasts. The core of this book is for the Second Temple period, before the destruction of the Second Temple. And then it has on it a Gemara, a Talmud, which is called by all scholars the Scolion. Why it's called the Scolion, I have no idea. In other words, it's a simple text with a Gemara, with explanations. The explanations are much later than the text, and the original text is primarily in Aramaic. And this critical edition I'm holding was produced by Professor Vered Noam. This is basically the reason that she received the Israel Prize for Talmud. This is an incredible work of scholarship, using all the manuscripts of Megillat Ta'anit and comparing Megillat Ta'anit to all other rabbinic and non-rabbinic sources. In Megillat Ta'anit, the original text in Aramaic simply says, it's a list of the days when you're not allowed to fast. Be'esrim v'chamisha bo, on the 25th day of Kislev, Chanukat Yomin Timnaya, or Tamanya, it is the Hanukkah for 8 days, Udela lemispad, and you may not give eulogies. That's all Megillat Ta'anit says. It's called Hanukkah. It's 8 days. You're not allowed to eulogize. That's what the ancient text says from the Second Temple period. The Scolion there starts to hint at the story we see in the Tractate of Shabbat, which is about the miracle of the oil and so on and so forth. And here it gets really confusing, which is why I didn't want to Xerox it, because the different manuscripts of the Scolion have different explanations as to why we observe Hanukkah. You can't even give one explanation from Megillat Ta'anit itself as to why we observe Hanukkah. One set of manuscripts talks about Mipnei shetimu goyim et Beit HaMikdash, the Gentiles desecrated the temple. Ukshetakva balchut beit Chashmonai, and when the Hasmoneans attacked them, but kuhu, they checked, umatsubo shemen tahor, and they found pure oil. And it doesn't say there anything about the 8 days. And later on it says, Hayumitaskim bahem kol shmona, they were busy with the restoration of the temple for 8 days. And that is their explanation as to why there are 8 days. The other version of Megillat Tanit, which is the more well-known one, especially among Orthodox Jews, the other version basically has the same story as in the Tractate of Shabbat about the Nes Pach Hashemen, the cruise of oil that lasted for 8 days. It says, V'lo haya shemen b'mad la'adlik, there wasn't any pure oil. V'na'asa nes v'idliku mimena ad shmona yamim, and they lit it for 8 days, and so on and so forth. So according to Megillat Tanit, depending on which version you follow, the holiday is called Hanukkah. It mentions the 8 days. According to one version here, they found pure oil. According to the other version, they found pure oil that lasted for 8 days. And according to another sentence there, hitasku b'hechal, they were fixing up the hechal, the temple, for 8 days. So here we have an attempt to explain the 8 days. And by the way, it emphasizes what's the problem with the 8 days. The temple of Moses, the tabernacle of Moses, and the temple of Solomon were dedicated for how many days? 7. So what's unusual here is you have a temple dedication that's 8 days as opposed to 7, which is mentioned in connection with Moses and with Shlomo HaMelech, with King Solomon. We'll do the last 2 sources and then we will summarize. The next source is the one that you all learned in Hebrew school. And this is the only source that most Orthodox Jews in the world have ever heard of. And this is the story of Nes Pach Hashemen. And it's found in the Tractate of Shabbat, Folio 21b. I just want to move the screen down a bit. Here we go. What is the reason of Hanukkah? For our rabbis taught on the 25th day of Kislev, commence the days of Hanukkah, which are 8 in which a lamentation for the dead and fasting are forbidden. As that's a quote from Megillat Tanit. For when the Greeks entered the temple, they defiled all the oils, and when the Hasmonean dynasty prevailed, one cruse of oil, which lay with the seal of the high priest, it had sufficient oil for 1 day, yet it lasted for 8 days. The following year, these days were appointed a festival with the recital of Hallel and Thanksgiving. This is a standard explanation that every Jew in the world knows. Why do they know it? Because it's in the Babylonian Talmud. And the Babylonian Talmud, other than the Tanakh, is the most important book that the Jewish people has. This became the accepted explanation, whereas the books of Maccabees were unknown to most Jews because they were preserved in Greek. And Josephus was certainly unknown to most Jews because it was written in Greek. And Megillat Tanit was an esoteric work that most people were not familiar with. So this is the explanation that everyone knows. It talks about Hanukkah, that's the term. It talks about 8 days, and it gives the miracle of the cruse of oil. Perhaps the strangest explanation is found in Schechter Rabati, which this is the English translation by William Browd, I believe, who was a very learned Reform rabbi in New England. And it says Schechter Rabati might have been edited as late as the 9th century. It's a midrash from the land of Israel. And why are the lamps kindled during Hanukkah? Schechter Rabati asks, at the time that the sons of the Hasmonean, the high priest, triumphed over the kingdom of Greece, and then it refers to a verse in Zechariah, upon entering the temple, they found there rods. Please look at footnote 5, next to the word rods, at the bottom of the page. That's what it says in the Parma manuscript. In PE, which is perhaps Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, it says 8 rods. In other words, according to one of the versions of this midrash, when they entered the temple, they found 8 rods of iron, which they grooved out, and kindled wicks in the oil, which they poured into the grooves. Okay, that is a very odd explanation for why we would light candles for 8 days. As you know, in the temple, there is a menorah. And you'll see from Rabbi Berkowitz's lecture in a few minutes, how many branches does a menorah have? 7. So the explanation here says that we observe Hanukkah for 8 days because they found 8 rods and they lit oil in those 8 rods, which of course makes no sense whatsoever. If they lit the menorah in the temple, it had 7 rods. So this is a rather late source, rather hard to understand. But again, the holiday is called Hanukkah. There are 8 days, and it talks about the Shmona Shipudim, that's the Hebrew word used, the 8 rods in the temple. What can we make of all these different versions? Let me see if I can stop share. Then I can actually see all of you. Yofi. What can we make of all of these different versions? Remember, these are not modern explanations. These are all sources from the 2nd century BCE until the 9th century CE. In other words, it's not just our confusion, it's their confusion. They don't know why Hanukkah is being observed, or at least they don't have one consistent explanation, and they don't know why it is 8 days. I would like to summarize as follows. I think that the original purpose of Hanukkah was Chanukhat HaMizbeach, the dedication of the altar, as stressed in the first book of Maccabees. And why 8 days? And here I found an interesting explanation from Professor Solomon Zeitlin in his introduction to the first book of Maccabees. And he points out that the analogy of these 8 days is King Chizkiyahu. When you in your free time, open up the 2nd book of Chronicles, chapter 29, 2 Chronicles, chapter 29, verses 16 and 17. I'm not going to read it to you right now. It says there that when Chizkiyahu was purifying and rededicating the temple, he observed that for 8 days. And that is a good analogy to what we're doing on Hanukkah, right? The Maccabees are not building a temple. It's not like Moses, who's building a tabernacle. It's not like Solomon, who's building the first temple. Chizkiyahu is rededicating a temple. And that's exactly what the Maccabees are doing. They're rededicating the Beit HaMikdash. And therefore, it makes sense that it would be for 8 days and not for 7 days. That is the most convincing explanation I have found for the 8 days as opposed to 7 days in the other temple dedications. And what about the Festival of Lights? We saw that the first mention is Josephus Flavius from the end of the 1st century of the Common Era. This became the main explanation later on in the Scholion to Megillat Ta'anit, in Sikta Rabbati, in the Tractate of Shabbat. I believe that it could be because even in First Maccabees, one of the things they rededicated was the menorah. It doesn't just talk about the altar. It talks about altar, it talks about the incense, it talks about the table, and it talks about the menorah. So therefore, even though that was not the main thing or the only thing in the first book of Maccabees, the menorah is there. It talks about rekindling the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash. So therefore, it's not a huge jump to jump from the emphasis on the altar to an emphasis on the lights. And by the time of Josephus, it was already called the Festival of Lights. And since Josephus is writing after the temple has been destroyed, I think it would make sense that the Jewish people looked for something else to emphasize rather than the Mizbeach, the altar. They no longer had a Mizbeach that they could use. The Romans had destroyed the Mizbeach. So therefore, it could be that they started emphasizing the light, the menorah, instead of the Mizbeach as the reality of their time dictated. I want to conclude by emphasizing the reason for all of this. As Josephus said, the reason for all of this is religious freedom. He says that's why we call it the Festival of Lights. But I want to read you one paragraph from Professor Gaster's book about Hanukkah, and I'll conclude with that. What Hanukkah celebrates is the inalienable right of human beings to their own character and identity. And he goes on to say, Hanukkah is not, as is often supposed, a festival of independence. It is a festival of dedication, and the difference is crucial. What it asserts is not the right of every man to be himself and do as he pleases, but to be a servant of God, and in that service to defy princes. Moreover, so the message continues, the only God whom a man is required to serve is the God revealed to him in the history and experience of his people, not an idol imposed from without. The condition of independence is consecration, and its hallmark is devotion. I think that that is a beautiful explanation of the deep meaning of Hanukkah, and I hope as we light the candles this year, we'll remember the words of Josephus, the joy about religious freedom, and the words of Professor Gaster, and I wish all of you a Chag Hanukkah Sameach.
A very hearty Yasher Koach to our president, Rabbi Professor David Galinkin. Rabbi Galinkin, thank you so much for helping us to begin deciphering the riddle of what exactly we are celebrating on Hanukkah. It seems that we have to continue this conversation, not in the virtual Beit Midrash, but we have to come to your Beit Midrash, the Beit Midrash, the office of Rabbi David Galinkin, which you're all invited to on your next trip.
These are real books behind me.
Indeed.
Laila Tov, thank you very much, and I apologize
that
that I have to
replace
leave.
those real books. So thank you so much, Rabbi Galinkin. It's now my privilege to turn to Rabbi Irena Gritsevskaya, our executive director of Midreshet Schechter, who is going to teach from Bush to Gorbachev, how and why was Hanukkah observed by world leaders. I do want to say that Rabbi Irena Gritsevskaya is a phenomenon in that she commutes between Tel Aviv and Kyiv. She is an extraordinary rabbi and teacher and director for all of our efforts at our Arts and Culture Center in Neve Schechter, which is in the Neve Tzedek neighborhood in Tel Aviv. We have about 1,000 Israelis in Tel Aviv that come to experience arts and culture and Jewish learning at Neve Schechter. And then, of course, we are active in 4 cities in Ukraine. Rabbi Irena Gritsevskaya is a major talent. I hand over the bima to you, Irena. We look forward to learning with you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much. Actually, it was amazing to hear Rabbi Galinkin showing us all this explanation as why in history we studied Hanukkah, because I actually wanted to talk to you about why do we celebrate Hanukkah today, and what actually the new meaning of Hanukkah in the last 50 years, and you will see there are advantages to internet too, not only to books. Actually, I really like Hanukkah for one reason. It's the most flexible Jewish holiday that shows our great quality adaptivity. Throughout the history, as you've seen in a different explanation that Professor Galinkin gave to you, the meaning of the holidays changed. When we had no army in the Babylonia, we celebrated the religious meaning of the holiday. When we came back as new Zionists to Israel, the old meaning of the military victory became the most important one. So we always played with different meanings of the holidays. And I really think that we've discovered something new in the past 50 years when the celebration of Hanukkah, at least abroad, not in Israel, changed subsequently. So let me see if I can show the presentation. Does it work? Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So actually, the first in the United States who recognized Hanukkah was Jimmy Carter in 1979, and some of you might remember that. It was the celebration was held on the Ellipse, alone south of the White House. And initially, there was a refusal to issue a permit to a menorah based on First Commandment. But then, because there was a Christmas tree, there was a decision that it's possible to do it. So it's actually amazing that those traditions to light Hanukkah candles outside the houses, on the public spaces, they're relatively new. They're not so far away from us. The tradition began, but not year after year, but from time to time. Ronald Reagan, he met rabbis in the White House, but it was more like Jewish people coming to him, bringing the menorah, showing the holiday. George W. Bush participated in Hanukkah celebrations by playing with the children, dreidel game. It wasn't really a formal Hanukkah celebration, but more a reception that he held in the old executive building, adjacent to the White House, not yet in the White House itself. Actually, Bill Clinton brought groups of children to the Oval House in 1996. And we can see here already the lighting of the menorah, a small one. And you can also see how the change, you can see female rabbis here and the Christmas tree on the picture. So the colors of the celebration change a little bit. First official celebration actually was made by President Bush in 2001 in bookseller's room on the ground floor. What he said then, that tonight, for the first time in American history, the Hanukkah menorah will be lit at the White House residence. It's a symbol that this house may be a temporary home for Laura and me, but it's the people's house and it belongs to people of all faiths. Do you remember that Professor Galinkin actually ended his the words he said? He said it's actually that Josephus said it's a joy of religious freedom. That's what was celebrated by the president in the White House. Since then, the tradition to light menorah candles in the White House continues every year. President Obama continues the tradition, bringing children and lighting the menorah. In 2013, it was actually at the same day as Thanksgiving, and then there was invented a menorah in the shape of a turkey, kind of combining the Thanksgiving Day and Hanukkah. Hanukkah receptions continued in the White House throughout the year. In 2021, Kamala Harris actually participated in the lighting, and her spouse said, to think that today I'm here before you as the first Jewish spouse of an American president or vice president celebrating Hanukkah in the people's house. It's humbling, and it's not lost on me that I stand before you all on behalf of all Jewish families and communities out there across our country. I understand that, and I really appreciate that. Not only in the United States, but in the other countries too, in the other European countries, the tradition of participating in the public Hanukkah lighting by world leaders continues. But notice that it's a completely different twist. What's so special in American celebrations is actually that the celebration is inside the White House, and they are making it their own. The celebration that the President Bush made in the White House, he actually invited all the workers, all the Jewish workers around. And since 2005, I think, the White House is made kosher for Hanukkah celebration, to be able to bring all the Jewish people there. So it's very different from what other countries do, where usually there are two options. Either you come to visit the Jewish community, to their celebration, to the synagogues, to the Jewish centers, etc., or there are public menorahs, public Hanukkiyot in the main streets of the city. So in a way, the tradition that exists today in the United States is very unique, where presidents year after year, as something as already an American tradition, light a menorah in the White House itself. So I will switch into Europe just to give you a little bit overview, and then we will ask ourselves why Hanukkah and why what's the meaning of what we can see. The European Commission president, I will switch a little bit. If we switch into Europe, we can see there that the difference between what happens in America when actually they celebrate Hanukkah as if it's our celebration, and between Europe where it's actually Jewish celebration and it's important to take part in it or to participate in it. We can actually see that the president of the European Committee said in 2023 when he was invited by Jewish community to this celebration of Hanukkah, he said, this is horrific and it's painful. He referred to the evil that's surfacing Europe right now and anti-Semitism in Europe. No parent should be afraid to send their children to school. There should be no place for this hatred, especially here in Europe. And there is no justification to the rise in anti-Semitism. No war, no political argument can excuse it. Hanukkah is the story of the Jewish people regaining their freedom of worship after times of persecution. This moment of celebration must also be one to say that never again will we tolerate hate against Jewish people. Plaži masela se matina. So basically, the statement is that there will be no anti-Semitism and the religious freedom, joy of religious freedom is one of the important values in Europe. I'll switch to Poland because actually Poland is one of the European countries where the presidents light Hanukkah candles for almost 17 years, longer than any other country, which is surprising. And that's the celebration from 2023. A few days before this picture was taken, right-wing politicians in Poland actually took the fire extinguisher and extinguished the Hanukkah, causing a lot of damage. And it happened in just last year. So till nowadays, Hanukkah actually causes a lot of anti-Semitic debates around the lighting of the Hanukkah candles. That's the celebration in Great Britain in Trafalgar Square. Probably one of the largest Hanukkahot, largest menorahs is on the Trafalgar Square since 2007. Think about it, it's not too long ago when the mayor of London decided to have Hanukkah candles lighting there in the Trafalgar Square. And that's the mayor of London in 2023 that actually lights the Hanukkah candles. Queen of England visited Jewish communities for Hanukkah, and I could not find a moment of lighting of the candles in the Buckingham Palace itself. So there were ceremonies, receptions, many things, but never lighting a Hanukkah in the Buckingham Palace. That's actually a long time ago in 1982 when she received a present, a Hanukkah menorah from the Jewish leaders. So it's a second approach. It's an approach where when the leaders participate in Jewish celebrations, they go out to take part of in them. There is actually a big public celebration in public squares, but it's never yours. It's never something that you own as a leader of the country. It's a Jewish celebration. Last year was the first time when actually in Champs-Élysées, in the Élysée Palace, the lighting of the Hanukkah candles was taking place by President Emmanuel Macron, and there was a huge debate. He actually was. Everyone was against him from right and from left because of the secular position of France and because French politicians are not supposed to participate in religious acts. So think about it, it never happened before that. It happened the first time last year, and there was a lot of criticism against this act because of the special of the special character of the relationship between religion and the country in France. This is actually the moment I remember as a child in 1991, when Mikhail Gorbachev came to London to visit Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, they lit the candles together, and Mr. Gorbachev asked Rabbi Jonathan Sachs what we had just done. And Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, he says, I told him that 22 centuries ago in Israel, after the public practice of Judaism had been banned, Jews fought for and won their freedom. And these lights were the symbol of that victory. And I continued, 70 years ago, Jews suffered the same loss of freedom in Russia, and you have now helped them to regain it. So you have become part of the Hanukkah story. So that actually was the first year when Hanukkah came to the Soviet Union. I remember it as a child. That day, many refuseniks and people who were in opposition to the regime, like Sakharov, came to the Central Square, and they lit the Hanukkah for the Jewish celebration. I remember my parents were terrified because after you are trying to hide your identity for many years, it's very scary to see the celebration in a open, in a public place. But since then, actually, there were always public celebrations. In Russia and in Ukraine, Zelensky continued them. Till nowadays, we every year we put our big Hanukkah on the Central Square in Kiev. We received the government approval for that. And it always amazes me that you really need the affirmation of the government to put the Hanukkah there, and we year after year receive it, and it's there as an important symbol of our religious freedom. So right now I want to make a break and really to think about why Hanukkah is so special. And there is something very special in Hanukkah celebrations because we always we are always surprised about how this kind of not the most important Jewish holiday, let's admit it, it's not in the Torah, it's not one of the most important Jewish holidays, became so substantial in our life today. So one of the reasons definitely is the timing and the cultural context of the holiday, the fact that it comes together with Christmas, it comes together with Thanksgiving, and as you've seen, it's one of the important parts of the Christian bookshelf. Actually, in a way, it's easier for other nations to get connected to Hanukkah because they saved Hanukkah for us. In any way, we wouldn't have those books as part of our bookshelf. So there is this cultural connection that makes it very clear. Hanukkah has this public nature of the holiday, which other holidays don't have. Most of our holidays, whether it's Pesach or Yom Kippur, we are entering our synagogues, closing the doors, and that's where the celebration is. Here, we are actually kind of committed to go out and to publicize the miracle. I wonder if now it's actually internet that publicizes it, or we actually, is it more important to put it on your window or to put it on the internet today? But the fact that we have to publicize it actually is very helpful. There is a universal message to Hanukkah, which is very clear. The holiday of light, that's something that any nation can connect. And the religious freedom is the message that any nation can connect. And that's the reason why it's so easy for the political leaders to connect to the meaning of Hanukkah. And it's different from other holidays. The length of the celebration makes it very convenient. The fact that we have 8 days allows flexibility in celebrating it, and it's easier to have those events all around the country. It's actually less religious gravity, less limitations for the celebrating it, and it makes it easier for the leaders to do it. But for me, maybe the most important is that this holiday became actually a political declaration. The important declaration that we actually can light the Hanukkah candles in the public space. And whether we believe it or not, we still need this affirmation of the leaders in order to celebrate our holidays. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, he said that Hanukkah has this universal message. The symbol of Hanukkah is the Chanukiah we light for 8 days in memory of the temple menorah, purified and rededicated by the Maccabees all those centuries ago. Faith is like a flame. Properly tended, it gives light and warmth, but let loose, it can burn and destroy. We need in the 21st century a global Hanukkah, a festival of freedom for all the world's faiths. For though my face is not yours and your face is not mine, if we are each free to light our own flame, together we can banish some of the darkness of the world. I wanted to end my presentation with this photograph from Germany in 1932, when Hanukkah is inside, but outside you can see the Nazi flag. It was taken by Rachel Posner, and she wrote on this photograph, "Death to Judah." So the flag says, "Judah will live forever." So the light answers. And actually to wish us all that we will be able to have this public celebrations of Hanukkah forever, and that our menorah will never have to hide inside our houses. Actually, there is a great, it makes Hanukkah very important because it's also our public fight for our right to light the menorah. It makes us visible on the public space. And yes, I want to say it's amazing that for years, American presidents light Hanukkah candles in the White House, making this celebration their own.
Yashar kochech, Rabbi Irena Gritsevskaya. Rabbi Irena, this is very unrabbinic that you didn't take up the entire time that you have. We have another 5 minutes. So I just want to open it up. If any of you have questions or comments that you want to share with Rabbi Irena Gritsevskaya, this is your moment to do so.
So that's actually very rabbinic.
Rabbi Irena, that was a totally inspiring presentation. I was particularly touched by that picture of Gorbachev and Rabbi Sachs.
Yeah, I actually remember that year very well because I remember how terrified my parents were by all those pictures on the television of the Hanukkah on the center of Moscow, and how they said it will be the beginning of the anti-Semitism. Now it will come. Now when they know that will come. So I think it's very important that nowadays we have Hanukkah celebrations open. And in a way, in Israel, when we don't need to ask someone, we don't have this complex relationship, it makes it very different And sometimes I think I wish my kids would understand the complexity. My kids who grow up in Israel, I think it lacks the complexity and understanding of the complex nature of Hanukkah.
Right, and that speaks to the critical role of the parent, as in you, Vishinantam levanecha, that you shall teach them to your children. So it's so important that you're able to pass on that critical history so that they're able to value the freedom that they have in the modern state of Israel and not take that for granted, right? Lo nes katan, that we're able to rejoice in our freedom in Israel. When you think back in your childhood, Irena, what it was that, that feeling of persecution, that feeling of fright that your parents had, right? And it's so important to be able to pass that on from one generation to the next, Lador Vador.
And it's also amazing that Hanukkah, it's actually one of the things that Hanukkah celebrates is the religious freedom of Jews from Greek culture and the religious freedom to do what they want. And now we actually have this freedom in most of the Western countries. And notice that actually those public celebrations of Hanukkah, it's actually it's mostly, if not only, in Western countries. You will not find it in any other culture still nowadays. So I've actually checked it. An Indian president, he always sends kind of congratulations to the Jews on Hanukkah, which is also amazing, not on Passover, not on Yom Kippur, not on other holidays, but mainly Hanukkah. Hanukkah really became a center when world leaders celebrate us and talk to us, even though for us it's not the most important holiday, but not other leaders. So it's an important symbol of the countries that have this religious freedom.
Toda rabba, Rabbi Irena Gritsevskaya, and I encourage you to continue the conversation offline with Rabbi Irena Gritsevskaya. You all have an open invitation to visit her at our Neve Schechter campus in Tel Aviv, or in Kyiv to see a modern day miracle of how it is that we're supporting the Jews of Ukraine today in 4 different cities in the country. So thank you so much. And it's actually a very beautiful segue into our last session of the hour and a half that I'm privileged to share with you. And that is entitled On the Origin of the Menorah, Text, Art, and History. I want to begin by talking a bit about halacha l'maaseh, a little about practical halacha related to Hanukkah. I feel we would be remiss if we didn't do that with Hanukkah right around the corner. Rabbi Irena spoke beautifully about the core mitzvah of Hanukkah, and that is Persume Nisa, publicizing the miracle of Hanukkah, being out there and declaring that miracle, not only for the Jewish people, but also for the world. That is one of the reasons, by the way, that we have Hanukkah gatherings, that we have Hanukkah parties, because we want to do that with our community, right? And beyond that, we also want to do that by displaying the Chanukiah in the window for everyone to see. Also, when we light the Chanukiah, the candles are placed from right to left, right? You place them sequentially into the menorah, but they are lit from left to right. Very important to keep in mind, a good reminder as we go into the holiday. And also notice the terminology that I've used vis-a-vis the lampstand. I mentioned menorah, which is what I want to teach on the origin of the menorah, the origin of the lampstand. And yet the lampstand that we use on Hanukkah, rightfully, the correct terminology is Chanukiah, not menorah. Chanukiah, which is connected to what Rabbi Galinkin was talking about before, and that is the rededication of the altar or the rededication of the temple. So our lampstand that we light over Hanukkah is related intimately to that moment of the rededication of the altar and the rededication of the temple. And yet, to understand that symbol thoroughly, we need to go back, and we need to go back into biblical sources. Indeed, the menorah is the most characteristic motif in Jewish art. It first appears in historical memory in the context of the wilderness, in the context of the tabernacle of the Mishkan, and it is prominent, of course, in the first and second temple periods. Eventually, what ends up happening is that symbol disappears for a period of time, for a period of about 300 years, and then it resurfaces. And I would say that it resurfaces with a vengeance in late antiquity. So what I want to do over this next 25 minutes or so is I want to take you on a journey from biblical sources to rabbinic into first, second temple periods. And then we're going to see what happens to the menorah in late antiquity, and specifically the late Roman and Byzantine periods. Let's begin with this quote from Exodus 25, verses 31-40, where we're given the command of making the menorah, of making the lampstand in relation to the tabernacle. It says there in Exodus 25, "You will make a menorah of pure gold. Hammered out it will be made. Its base, its shaft, its cups, its knobs, and its blossoms will be hammered from it. 6 branches will emerge from its sides, 3 branches of the menorah from its one side, and 3 branches from the menorah from its second side. 3 cups engraved like almonds on the one branch, a knob and a flower, and 3 cups engraved like almonds on the next branch, a knob and a flower. So it will be for the 6 branches that emerge from the menorah, all of it in a single hammered piece of pure gold. You will make its lamps 7. The next slide that we have here is a slide that gives us a sense of what that menorah that stood in by the tabernacle and that stood in temple times looked like. What is so striking about the description of the menorah, and what we immediately connect with, is the extent to which that description is connected to nature. Josh, if we can go back to the previous slide, right? You notice that when it describes the menorah, it's talking about branches, it's talking about almonds, it's talking about knobs and flowers, which immediately takes us into the land of Israel. Noga Reuveni, who was the founder of the Biblical Landscape Reserve in Israel, which is very, very close to Modi'in and also not far from Ben Gurion Airport, he wrote a series of books about flora and fauna in the land of Israel, in our biblical heritage. And if we go 2 slides forward, right, we take a look here at the salvia or moriah plant, which one finds blooming in the spring, in the early spring in Israel. When you take a look at this plant, immediately you see what it is that Torah is talking about in terms of the design of the menorah. And Noga Reuveni, who learned this from his parents, right, makes a very, very strong argument that this is precisely where the design of the menorah comes from. When you look at the salvia plant, you immediately see those knobs, you see those calyxes, right, the flowers. And what's also interesting too is that the lampstand, the menorah, is described as being meshukadim. The lights themselves were in the shapes of almonds. Right? Almonds, we know, are also in the shapes of eyes. And so the menorah had a symbolic connection to being the divine eye, or the light of God, the divine eye of God, as it were. In the first temple period, we know from the descriptions that we have in the first book of Kings, chapter 7:49, right, that there were 10 menorot. There were 10 lampstands. The menorah, 5 on the right and 5 on the left, placed in front of the inner sanctum of fine gold, with their flowers, lamps, and tongues of gold. and a golden menorah and its lamps to kindle every evening. The main purpose of that lampstand was to serve as a ner tamid. It was to serve as an eternal light in the precinct of the temple. Right? That was the core purpose of that menorah. And so there it stood in the first temple period. In the second temple period, let's stick to the first temple period as we're looking at a coin here from that period. And you see the menorah there. You see the lampstand, the 7-branch lampstand. Okay. And we see the flip side of that coin as well. Okay. And then what we do is we transition from first temple period into second temple period. What we're looking at here is what is known as the tomb of Jason, which is in the Rehavia neighborhood of Jerusalem. This is definitely worth a stop on your next trip to Israel. It's found on Rehov Alfasi in the Rehavia neighborhood. Very, very interesting place that comes to us from the Second Temple period. And what was discovered by archaeologists in this tomb was engravings on the walls of menorot, right? And there they are, right? Very, very crude engravings of menorot. It's clear that they came to us from the Second Temple period. We also know well that there were not 10 menorot, not 10 lampstands that stood in the Second Temple. Okay, head on to the next slide. Right, this is part of an engraving that was found in the upper part of the old city of Jerusalem, right? An engraving that, right, purports to be the menorah that was in the temple. Again, you see the 7 branches of the menorah, as opposed to the 9 branches of the Chanukiah that we have, right? Remember, we have 8 nights of Hanukkah, along with the Shamash, which accounts for the 9 branches, right? But the menorah that stood in the temple, there we have the 7 branches. Our next slide. The prophet Zechariah, okay, describes very, very beautifully what it is that the menorah looked like according to this particular prophetic vision. The angel asked, "What do you see?" And I, the prophet Zechariah, responded, "I see a menorah entirely of gold with its bowl on its top. Its 7 lamps are upon it, and there are 7 ducts for the lamps on its top. There are 2 olive trees over it, one at the right of the bowl and one on its left." If we take a look in the next slide, we've got this very, very beautiful image from a Spanish manuscript from the Middle Ages, right, which is precisely based on that prophetic vision of Zechariah, right? And it's believed that this is more or less what the menorah looked like in Second Temple times. Okay, from Second Temple, of course, right, we know well, Second Temple stands until 70 CE, right? We have the destruction of the Second Temple, right? And then, right, the most famous depiction that we have of the menorah appears here in the Arch of Titus, of course. In the Arch of Titus, right, we see the Romans carrying away, right, the menorah that stood in the temple, right? It's a very, very striking image, right, and a very emotional image, right, for those of us who have seen this in Rome. And it's believed that the upper portion of the menorah, right, according to scholars, right, that this was a very, very accurate depiction of the menorah that stood in the temple, right? Incredibly striking. And Josephus, who was quoted before during Rabbi Galinkin's presentation, right, wrote the following of that menorah that was carried away. He writes of the parade in Rome. Stay there for a moment, Josh. "The spoils in general were borne in promiscuous heaps. but conspicuous above all stood out those captured in the temple at Jerusalem. These consisted of a golden table, many talents in weight, and a lampstand, likewise made of gold, but constructed on a different pattern from those which we use in ordinary life. Affixed to a pedestal was a central shaft, from which there extended slender branches, arranged trident fashion, a wrought lamp being attached to the extremity of each branch. Of these, there were 7, indicating the honor paid to the number among the Jews. After these, and last of the spoils, was carried a copy of the Jewish law. The Arch of Titus, of course, is crafted in Rome a decade following the destruction of the temple. But as I said before, it's generally assumed that at least the upper parts of this menorah accurately reflect the menorah, the lampstand that stood in the temple. All right, there it is again, the relief. Now, the image that we see here comes to us from the 4th century, one of the most famous archaeological sites in the Middle East, and that is the Dura Europos synagogue. Right, this is the first time that we see the menorah displayed in a public institution. Right? And if you look at the indentation, it's believed that this is where the Torah was kept. Right? Just above the indentation where the Torah was kept, we look up, and to the left, we see the menorah. The center piece that we see there, the iconography that we see in the center, that represents the entryway to the temple. And then to the right, the iconography that we see there represents Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac. Right? As I said before, this is the first time that we see the menorah presented publicly. I would say between the destruction of the Second Temple, right, and Dura Europos, there is a dearth of menorah imagery within Jewish communities across the Middle East and beyond. And then all of a sudden, we see a miraculous revival of that image of the menorah. Where do we see that revival? We see it in catacombs, okay? Most importantly, we see it in Beit She'arim in northern Israel, which is believed to be the burial place of Yehuda Nasi, of Judah the Prince, right? We see many menorot in the catacombs, the sarcophagi that appear in that burial site. And not only that, we also see the menorah appearing in mosaics in synagogues, ancient synagogues in northern Israel. The mosaic that you see here to the right, we've got the menorah, and then just below the menorah, to the right side, we see the shofar, and to the left side, we see a lulav, right, which are all coming to perpetuate the memory of the temple, right, and specifically, right, perpetuating the memory of the Second Temple. Just below that, we see an inscription, Shalom al Yisrael, peace upon Israel. From here, we see a flurry of menorot appearing. We turn to the next slide. Okay, we see menorot appearing on small lampstands. Okay, and the reason that you see the lamp, one lamp juxtaposed to another, is obviously on the right side, we have a lamp that would appear in an oil lamp that would appear in a Jewish home. And you see the image of the menorah at the top of that lamp, right, on what could be a handle of that lamp. And on the left side, right, the early Christians were using the image of the crucifix and putting that into their own lamps, right? The image of the crucifix, right, proliferated all over, right, the Byzantine Mideast, right, the Byzantine period, the Roman period, right? We continue going forward, right? And again, in inscriptions that we see on churches from that period, right, you see the crosses, And then to the left side, you see the menorah, right? And it's believed, and it's Professor Lee Levine that argues this beautifully in a wonderful article that he wrote entitled The History and Significance of the Menorah in Antiquity. He believes that one of the reasons that we see the proliferation and of the symbol of the menorah is precisely because of the ubiquity of the symbol of the cross, right? And Jews felt a need in that time, right, to affirm their own identities, right? And so they took, very, very similar images, just like you see on the screen now. And in place of where it is that you see the cross, they would put the menorah. Take a look at the next slide, right? So here we have, right, this beautiful image taken from one of the archaeological sites in the Galilee, right, from a synagogue. You see two menorot, right? And then in the center, again, we have the entryway into the temple and lamps hanging from the main lampstands, right, from branches of the menorah, right? And then we also have Christian imagery, right, which is very, very similar in the next slide, right? There you've got the cross, and look at that, right? So it's clear that there was this cultural give and take between early Christians and Jews. And I believe Professor Lee Levine makes a very, very compelling argument why we see the recurrence and this wave of menorah imagery reappearing between the 4th and 7th centuries, right? Not only that, as we take the symbol forward, right, we recall again the image of the Arch of Titus, right? It's believed that this is what the original Arch of Titus image looked like in full color, right? There they are carrying away the menorah. And of course, when the state of Israel is born in 1948, what do we take as the symbol of the state of Israel, as the emblem of the state of Israel? It's that same menorah. It's as if metaphorically and symbolically, right, even though, right, the original, of course, right, is stolen by the Romans, the temple is destroyed, right, we are propelled into Galut, we are propelled into the diaspora. With the rebirth of the state of Israel, what do? We make a declaration that we have returned, not only as a people, but what have we done? We have returned the menorah to its proper place. And that becomes the central emblem of rebirth for the Jewish people in our own land. Of course, on either side, juxtaposed to the menorah, juxtaposed to the lampstand, you also see the branches of the olive tree, right, which connects us beautifully back to that mosaic that we saw before. Shalom al Yisrael, may there be peace unto Israel. And that, I would say, is our fervent hope and wish in these days, that peace return to the state of Israel. Josh, I'll ask you to stop sharing at this point so I can see everyone on the screen in our Beit Midrash. Again, so wonderful to welcome you all to this virtual Beit Midrash. I feel as if metaphorically we were gathered here in Yerushalayim as we are about to celebrate this Festival of Lights. And may that Festival of Lights not only bring hope and peace to us all, but I hope and pray that this Festival of Lights, as we started with, I hope and pray that it will bring our hostages home as well. I will take a deep breath and I will open it to any questions and comments. I see a number of you are writing in the chat.
Rabbi Kerbal?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi Matt, for a beautiful presentation. I couldn't help but notice that the lamps hanging from the menorah look like the eternal light, the Ner Tamid in synagogues today. And I'm wondering if we took the style of the Ner Tamid from those pictures that you shared.
We absolutely did, Paul, and I'm thrilled that you noticed that particular detail, right? That is exactly the design that has been used many times over for Ner Tamid that appears in many modern synagogues. And again, it's part of this rich cultural exchange that takes place over many generations, right? And there's a wonderful book that I highly recommend appear on every Jewish bookshelf, and that is David Beale's The Cultures of the Jews. It is an encyclopedic work on this notion of how it is that we have borrowed from the cultures that we have lived amongst. And that is what makes Judaism so strong. That is what makes the Jewish people so strong, that we're able to build bridges to the worlds in which we live, take the best of those worlds, and reappropriate that within a Jewish context. Right? We did that beautifully in terms of the observance of Pesach. Right, that is based on Greek symposia meals. We take that model of Greek symposia meals, we turn it into the Seder as we know it, right? And so too, the cultural exchange that we saw playing across the screen tonight, or this morning, or this afternoon, wherever it is that you are, that borrowing of images that we see between the crucifix, the menorah, and of course the menorah and the Ner Tamid. Thank you, Rabbi Kerbel. Other comments or questions that you have?
Yeah, I was when I was visiting Rome and many Catholic churches, I saw this so often, and it's obviously a replica of the menorah with three on each side, and of course the middle, the crucifix takes the place of the Ner Tamid from a Catholic perspective. And it took me about 4 churches before I finally asked the guide, what's this supposed to represent? And of course, that's exactly what it was supposed to represent.
Right. Thank you for sharing that, Alan. I love that you shared that. And, of course, Catholicism, Christianity, right, borrow intimately from all of biblical and Jewish tradition, right? And in fact, when you look at the way the Pope dresses, right, during, a service, the Pope looks like a high priest, right? There's no question, right? You look at the clothing the Pope, the robe, right? Everything. It borrows heavily from our traditions. So I love that you saw that image of the menorah in churches. And the fact that Alan Edelman jumped in, I also want to share with you that about a month ago, we had the great joy and privilege of celebrating the Schechter Institute's 40th anniversary. And in honor of that 40th anniversary, we had a magnificent mission to Israel in which we had 23 participants. A number of those participants are Zooming with us tonight. I saw Marla before, Alan Edelman, Harvey and Shelley Lefkowitz, David Kext. Great joy that you are all here. I would just love to ask one of you to pipe up and just share one of your most precious memories from that journey in Israel together.
Well, I would just reinforce David Golinkin, I think, made the announcement about the WZO elections, and he encouraged us, and I just want to take it up a notch. We must, and David probably wanted to stay away from the political aspect, but the Haredi, like many things in Israel, they are taking over and getting more and more power. And if we don't get progressive Jews, conservative Jews in particular, in our case, to get out and vote, we're going to lose the money that should be coming to us for our programs. So please, please, please organize your congregations and get every one of your congregants to go online and vote. We need to have a national, international push on this. So I just want to emphasize, it was an incredible experience, especially going down to the envelope in Ofakim. So proud that Schechter is doing a program to help survivors in Ofakim. And the unique experience of going to a base with Haredi soldiers. It wasn't so comfortable for the women in the group, unfortunately, but it was quite exciting to see Haredi in a base that's training them to serve in the IDF.
Thank you, Alan, for making that plug for the Zionist elections. And it was just put in the chat that first you have to register with Merkaz, and then you can vote in the election. I encourage you all to do that. And Harvey and Shelley, I saw that you took yourselves off mute. If you'd like to share something about the mission.
Well, I'd like to, I don't know if you can see me, Shelley and I would like to thank you, first of all, for today's seminar. It was really wonderful. And on a mission, besides doing a lot of learning, we personally got to meet the leaders of the Schechter Institute, and you have a very, very fine team of people, and we appreciate everything you do, and we'll continue to support you in the great work that the Machon Schechter and the Neve Schechter are doing in Israel and in Ukraine, and by Zoom to us who are in America. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harvey. You did a major mitzvah there. It's actually a great moment as we approach the end of the calendar year to encourage all of you to make those tzedakah donations and to keep Schechter Institutes on your radar screen. As Alan mentioned, we are doing a lot of precious work in the country, in particular, engaging and working toward healing solutions, how it is that we deal with the trauma that Israel has faced over the past year and a half or so. We have new certificate programs in bibliotherapy, in psychodrama. We've expanded our pastoral care program. And we have a very, very special program, as Alan said, that we're running in partnership with Ofakim. And this falls under Rabbi Irena Gressivskaya's supervision. We have about 25 students that are participating in this program, which is a pastoral care certificate program. I'm proud to tell you that this is a very, very powerful partnership between Schechter Institutes and the Resilience Center in Ofakim. Most of the students that are participating in that program, which is being launched at this moment, are from Ofakim, but also a number of those students are from surrounding communities. And we are teaching healing modalities, how it is that we're able to recover from the trauma that we've all experienced. And on that note, I want to wish you a whole lot of or, a whole lot of light in Hanukkah. Chag Urim Sameach. Have a wonderful, wonderful festival of lights. And thank you all for joining this Zoom into Hanukkah. And of course, a very, very special thank you to Rabbi David Golinkin, president of Schechter Institutes, for his opening teaching, to Rabbi Irena Gressivskaya for taking us on this historical journey on the celebration of Hanukkah, and to Josh Schumann, again, thank you for all of your technical support behind the scenes. And again, we look forward to seeing you soon after the first of the year. Be well, Shavua Tov, and Chanukah Sameach.
Sameach.
Very nice. What do you think? Isn't it good?